This basically brainstorming exercise we had since this morning in collaboration with the PPIB, in collaboration with the UNSCAP and other stakeholders to talk about SDGs Goal 7 and trying to define some sort of roadmap for way forward. Hina would be giving you some summary, but before it, if I can request you to please join us on stage. Thank you. And Hina, can I request you to take over, please?
Thank you, Dr. Abid, and thank you to Honorable Minister for joining us on this very important initiative on the development of an SDG7 roadmap for Pakistan. That is crucial to achieve the renewable and clean energy transition in Pakistan and to achieve the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, and also to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. As we know that the energy transition plays an important role in combating the climate change and meeting the nationally determined contributions of Pakistan, we would have to look into how to ensure a sustained economic growth and respond to the increasing energy demand, along with how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and more importantly, how we could consider and capitalize these linkages between Sustainable Development Goal 7 and the other SDGs. Just as a background of the initiative, I would like to provide an information on how this whole roadmap has come into the process. So the ministerial declaration of the Second Asian and Pacific Energy Forum in April 2018 and the Commission Resolution 74/9 requested Economic and Social Commission of Asia Pacific to assist governments in the Asia Pacific region to make informed policy decisions to transform the energy sector in a way that supports the achievement of the targets and the goals. So in this regard, UNSCAP has initiated the development of the National Expert SDG tool for energy planning, in short, Next Step, which aims to help policymakers to make informed policy decisions to achieve the SDG7 targets and the nationally determined contribution targets. This Next Step model has also gathered this support from the Committee on Energy in its second session of UN, with recommendations to expand the number of countries being supported by this tool. The government of Pakistan, with the support of Private Power and Infrastructure Board, PPIB, Ministry of Energy, has expressed its interest to participate in this initiative and issued a support letter to provide collaboration and non-financial support to this project, thereby will be acting as a focal agency of the government of Pakistan. This will include maintaining liaison between the ministry focal persons and the other relevant agencies, stakeholders, organize meetings, consultative workshops, and bridging the communication between SCAP and PPIB. PPIB would also serve the support from Sustainable Development Policy Institute, and we are the local collaborators to support the data collection for this model and also the implementation of overall project activities. Hence, it's in efforts to continuously align our energy agenda with the international obligations, the government of Pakistan has shown its strong intent to strengthen the SDG targets through an integrated system approach using Next Step model. So to achieve this, we are identifying the best energy system pathway option in which an SDG implementation roadmap could play a pivotal pathway, and to complement this, guide all the policymakers and the decision makers to take possible measures to achieve the goals and the targets. Today, we are marking the first inception and the launch event of this next step tool with a consultative discussion, which is happening in the second session in the afternoon. In the morning, we started off with representation from relevant ministries with their keynote speeches on the overall introduction to the model, and also in the view of the current situation of the energy and the power sector of Pakistan and the other related climate policies and the targets and the measures. This afternoon, we are broken down into 3 separate groups, breakout sessions, where the 3 parallel sessions are happening, one on renewable energy, one on energy efficiency, and one on energy access. So these 3 groups are working in consultation where there are exercises happening, and they are given in 1-hour session, and they are about to compile their results and present 1 group each. So this was the overall breakout, the overall background and the breakout of what we have achieved so far. Just to provide a kind of a roadmap for this initiative. This roadmap will be handed over to the government of Pakistan after this 9-month of span, a 9-month span of time, where this model will act as a useful tool for the policymakers to support the other energy plans like IGCEP and the other policies that are underway in the government plans. So this gives us a right opportunity and a great chance to look beyond just transition to clean energy, but also to take all the factors as an integrated approach to overcome the other related issues, such as the most critical, the climate change. So with this, I would like to invite Honorable Minister for his special remarks for this event and enrich us with his remarks. Thank you.
My deepest appreciation and thanks to SDPI and UNESCAP, and of course one of the attached departments of the Ministry of Energy, PPIB is a co-sponsor, for inviting me here this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, being Pakistan's Minister for Power, which means electricity in this regard, is a one long night of lamentation. Ye sham-e ghariba hai jo hum roz padhte hain, because the electricity sector in Pakistan has been under a reform process since the ancient times. I was at university and becoming an engineer, and it's been a quarter century since then, more than that perhaps, and we having done a lot of administrative reform, let's just say, we have still reached a point where the power sectors particularly is deemed to be ungovernable, is deemed to be unfeasible, because the numbers have just become too large for the economy to manage. But before I go deeper into this night of lamentation, we'll just talk about the reason we are all gathered here, which is the development of a SDG7 roadmap. And of course, the SDG 7.1 is the one that concerns the Ministry of Power, which is the proportion of population with access to electricity, 7.1.1, as well as the proportion of population with access to clean cooking fuel, which is 7.1.2, and thanks Allah Almighty, the 7.1.2 is not my responsibility, Dr. Saab. It's with Dr. Musaddiq Malik, who is with petroleum and other energy resources. We are told, according to UNDP's recent reports, that 96% of population of Pakistan has access to electricity. That includes 5% of population that is off-grid. Sindh does the best here, 97.5%, followed by Punjab, 95%, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, 92%, and Balochistan with 75% electrified population. Well, these numbers are 4 years old, so this 2018-19 year. But there is, of course, the SDG 7.2.1, which is renewable energy, which perhaps a few years ago seemed like a distant dream, but suddenly has become an emergency and has to be done now. And if I may quote the Prime Minister without his permission, it has to be done yesterday. This clean energy transition that we're talking about. And ladies and gentlemen, this transition has will look like not really a transition, but a sudden jump that we have to make if we are to remain feasible. But of course, all this, whether it's a transition or the quantum jump, will require resources and more spending needs. Contrary to what we might feel, electricity consumption in Pakistan is less than many of its peers and its neighbors, particularly in rural areas. And so although per capita electricity consumption reached 452 kilowatt hours in 2018, that's about 10% of the average for the countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. So energy consumption, which again paradoxically is linked to higher economic growth and higher levels of prosperity, is also an indication that we have a long, long way to go. And some experts who just 2 or 3 years ago were of the opinion that we have too much electricity, in fact, are wrong. We know we need massively more amounts of electricity if Pakistan is to grow even to a medium income level country. So it should be very clear that we definitely need very large investments to be able to yield a very large generation capacity if we are to grow at a level which reduces poverty, if we are to grow at a level which reduces unemployment, and of course creates better job opportunities for our children. The reason I say this, because it's very simple to say that, you know, the previous government spent too much money on generating electricity and we won't. And now, 4 years down the line, suddenly we are faced with the fact that we might have a reasonable amount of generation capacity. But ladies and gentlemen, we simply do not have a reasonable amount of affordable electricity. And if I look at the energy sector, and my attached departments have been giving me presentations on it, it's very clear that we have gone through different phases, different fashions of fuels that we used. And of those, the most enduring one, and probably still one of the answers to our energy needs, is Pakistan's hydel potential. And large dams became unfashionable a few years ago because of the environmental concerns that they raised. But now that the world is energy short, hydel is once again on the agenda, on the table, and must be for Pakistan's future energy needs. But then in early 90s, we decided that oil or its derivatives were cheap enough that we could move massively into thermal generation. So we went into diesel and furnace oil, and then that proved to be unaffordable and went out the window. Hasn't really gone out the window. We still have some of it, but that's on the pain of death that we run those plants. Then not too long ago, back in 2013, when this party to which I belong came into power after the elections, it was told to us by experts that the cheapest source of electricity in 2013, ladies and gentlemen, was coal. And it remained so until the end of last year, when suddenly coal began to rise. And now coal is one of the more expensive sources of electricity you can buy. And so another of our energy sources, which we thought was affordable enough to import from abroad, has now gone out the window. It's very expensive. Coal is very expensive now, almost a 4 times rise in price in coal that we have witnessed over just the last 4 months. Then, of course, another advice that came to us back in 2013-14, that gas was a cheap source of energy. And so we went massively into gas. Even now, it's one of the better sources that we have, because the plants that were put in, the 4 RLNG plants, are perhaps the most efficient in the world in terms of efficiency. And so they're 60% plus 60, 61, 62%. But still, even gas now is very expensive. So the conclusion as we stand today in 2022, ladies and gentlemen, is not what kind of fuel we want to use. Given our economic situation, perilous economic situation, the transition, and this is a subtext to the development of a SDG roadmap, SDG7 roadmap, is that Pakistan has to find a way to generate electricity from its domestic resources. And what does that mean? It means, once again, our old longs stay idle, but the other is domestic coal, principally from Thar, but from other sources also, in Balochistan, in Punjab. So whatever coal-based capacity we have to run, it has to be from domestic coal, which brings its own sets of problems. But the fact is that given our huge energy needs in the future, imported fuel to generate electricity is just not affordable, or is unlikely to be in the medium term. So we are now left with idle domestic coal, and of course the renewable energy, solar and wind. So that's how the transition to a energy-rich future looks like from where I'm sitting. Already we have, we need investments, and the goal that has been set out in many policy documents is to have a 60% shift to clean energy by 2030. But I just said a few minutes ago that for Shahbaz Sharif, 2030 is just too late. We have to do it now. So a massive push you can expect in the coming months into solar in order to make it affordable. Hydel takes a longer time, of course, and much grave intensity of resources upfront, but we are working on that. There's also this policy shift that we have to make, is a 30% shift to electric vehicles by 2030, of which, of course, policy instruments have to be designed. And we rely on, of course, wizards like Dr. Abid Sulairi to guide us And I want to put this problem in front of this distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, that you have to find a set of incentives and disincentives have to be designed in order to nudge the policy in the right direction. And of course, to discourage movements into undesirable directions. And as I said, the desirable direction is a development of our domestic resources and domestic sources of fuel. And because anything that has to be imported has become unaffordable as of today, given our condition. I also seek this audience's collective wisdom in order to address the collective affordability challenge that we face in the Ministry of Energy and Power. So there's been much talk of green financing opportunities, of which we expect to avail many internationally available sources of funding. Of course, there's also our pledges that we have made in Paris, but this government will make its best effort to seek a share of finance available from carbon transactions. And also, of course, we have to think about limiting methane according to the global methane pledge. We also have some support from the United Kingdom regarding Pakistan's ability to counter its climate challenges. But of course, much more has to be done. There has been policy reform in the energy sector, as I told you. Reform history is nearly a quarter century old. Some of the recent efforts that have been made, and again, they have to be tested against reality. One of the much touted proposed reform is development of a comparative trading bilateral contract market with its rather unwieldy acronym of CTBCM, which has currently been submitted to the ministry to transition from a single buyer model to a multi-buyer model. Now, again, these transitions have proved very tricky for Pakistan. Our sole example of privatization of a distribution company, which is Karachi Electric, has proved to be a thorny nettle indeed. Very difficult to handle, manage, or direct. And of course, the suffering of the people of Karachi is immense at the same time. And how does one manage that? Experts have told us and will continue to tell us that it was not a very good idea to shift a publicly owned monopoly to a privately owned monopoly. But in the spirit of experimentation in policy, one always thinks that one is told that the private sector is more flexible, it is more nimble, it is more cost conscious. But the energy sector is a difficult example because here, as I just spoke about a few minutes ago, the most cost effective, the most energy efficient generation capacity that we have in the shape of the 4 RLNG plants were done wholly by the government of Pakistan, using resources owned by the people of Pakistan. So this is again a thorny nettle. The most forward-looking investments in the energy sector have come from the state, which is supposed to be stuck in the mud and inefficient and full of corrupt bureaucrats and politicians. They have done the most efficient part. They have done the most cost-effective investments. And where in the shape of IPPs, we have the most wasteful, least efficient, energy efficient plants that are running. So this conundrum should be up in the air in front of this distinguished audience, and I'm one of them. Is that who is told that the private sector is very efficient and does job well and is very nimble and flexible, when in fact in the energy sector it has been quite the opposite. So what does one learn from it? I'm not too sure, and I seek your guidance and wisdom on this. That how did that happen? Similarly, and I say this because in the CTBCM, the comparative market mechanism would require a great deal of privatization and opening up of our laws and regulations. But if shifting to a private sector driven model, as we have seen in the IPPs, is simply a carnival of rent seeking, what does one do? So this is a policy question, Dr. that I leave to you and your experts. Of course, one of the recent reforms has been the Pakistan electric vehicle policy. We already have, I think, one very positive move forward is the indicative generation capacity expansion plan. Again, a very unwieldy acronym of IGSEP, who's supposed to be revised each year. We are expecting, we already have a draft for 2022. Of course, will have to be revised radically. And I think, again, it will tell you how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has upended energy calculations worldwide. So our IGSEP, the first version of which was approved last year, the new version will look completely different because the pricing is out of whack. Coal is out, gas is out, all the fossil fuels are out. So what does one do? So IGSEP, as we expect this year, will be radically different in order, and this is really a real plug-in to the topic of today's gathering, is how do SDG7 transition roadmap. So IGSEP has much to say on it. We already have under another attached department of the ministry, the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy 2022, which is a document that I have to read again because I have to, now that we are under this great strain, so we have to think about conservation also, which we have never thought seriously as a nation. So this National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy is something that you can expect to hear about again in the coming weeks. And of course, the National Electricity Plan, which was passed last year, again, it calls for, if I, let me quote from it, to determine the power tariff through open comparative process among private investors, which again reopens the privatization question, and whether not to make any assumptions about the abilities of the private sector is also a question about the ability of the state and the ministry itself to manage the process efficiently, and to make sure that if any such auction or bidding takes place in the true spirit of transparency and integrity. So these are the challenges. And as I said, being Minister for Power is a Shame Ghariba. There are so many issues that I keep joking with my colleagues that the energy sector and its financial exposures are so massive to keep anyone up at night. So I am up at night every day. And then, of course, there's this thorny and never-ending load shedding question. And the truth is that we have now the generation capacity to make the country free of load shedding. But we don't have two things to make it possible. We don't have the money to generate electricity through diesel and furnace oil. Second, the state, as it stands today, does not have the capacity or the efficiency to recover the costs from the consumers. So that's, ladies and gentlemen, are two simple reasons for why my phone lines are jammed with messages regarding complaints on load shedding, and why this is happening, and why doesn't it end? Why did you end it during Eid holidays and not now? All kinds of questions are there. But of course, load shedding is simply a symptom of the bigger disease that we have, again, which is the affordability of the sector, the energy mix that we have, and the energy mix towards which we should be moving. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude by quoting an American theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, whose prayer is very famous, and it goes something like this, that, dear God, give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change. Give me the energy to change things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Pakistan Zindabad. जी जरूर जी, उर्दू मैं बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ STPI का और UNESCAP का, जिन्होंने मुझे यहाँ दावत दी। और पाकिस्तान ने 2015 में जो अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के तहत एक एजेंडा फॉर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट जिस पर दस्तखत किए थे, उसका एक हिस्सा जो है, जो उसका 7वां नुक्ता है, वो तवानाई के मुतालिक है कि आबादी के किस हिस्से तक को बिजली तक रसाई हासिल होगी और उसको हमें बढ़ाना है। तो इसके लिए आज हम यहाँ इकट्ठे हुए हैं, इस पर सोच विचार हुई है कि किस तरह हमें पाकिस्तान में आबादी के वो हिस्सा जिसके पास इस वक्त अभी बिजली तक रसाई नहीं है, वो रसाई हमें उन्हें देनी है। और उसके लिए रसाई देने के लिए दो उसके हिस्से हैं। एक तो बिलाशुबा जो बिजली का जो नेटवर्क है उसको हमें वसी करना है। पाकिस्तान में अभी भी जो तवानाई की कंजम्पशन है, जो इस्तेमाल है, वो दुनिया के बहुत सारे ममालिक से कम है, और लिहाजा ये हमें एक समझ होनी चाहिए, हम सबका जहन इस पर वाज़े और साफ होना चाहिए कि अगर पाकिस्तान ने मौशी तरक्की करनी है, सनती तरक्की करनी है, तो अभी हमें आने वाले सालों में बहुत ज्यादा तवानाई की जरूरत होगी, क्योंकि अभी भी हमारी जो पर कैपिटा कंजम्पशन है बिजली की, वो बहुत कम है। तो हमें अगर अपनी सनत को इस काबिल करना है, और एक ये भी इसमें हिस्सा है कि तवानाई की जो फराहमी है वो किसी भी वक्त की जरूरत से ज्यादा होनी चाहिए, ताकि उसकी बुनियाद पर मुस्तकबिल के फैसले किए जा सकें, मुस्तकबिल की इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ के। लिहाजा आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि आज मुझे 20,000 मेगावाट चाहिए तो मैं 20,000 ही लूंगा, और अगले साल मुझे 21 चाहिए तो मैं 21 बनाऊंगा। नहीं, आपको अगर आज 20,000 कंजम्पशन है तो आपकी तैयारी 25 की होनी चाहिए, तभी आप पाकिस्तान को वो जो मुआशी नमू के लिए जो दरकार है तवानाई, वो फराहम कर सकते हैं। और उसमें हुकूमत का बड़ा क्लियर पहले भी पॉलिसी आ चुकी है कि हम 2030 तक जो 60% हमारी तवानाई होगी, वो जो क्लीन एनर्जी है, जिसमें सूरज की रोशनी से बनाई हुई बिजली और हवा से बनाई गई बिजली और कुछ हद तक जो पन बिजली है, वो उसमें शामिल होगी। 2030 तक ये भी मंसूबा है कि कम से कम 30% कारें जो हैं वो बिजली से चलने वाली हों, ताकि जो तेल का इस्तेमाल है और कंजम्पशन है उसे कम किया जा सके। और ऑफ कोर्स हमें ये पूरी कोशिश करनी है कि आने वाले सालों में पाकिस्तान में जो जिस ईंधन से हम अपनी बिजली पैदा करते हैं वो ईंधन मुकामी तौर पर हासिल किया गया हो। तो उसके अब 4 ही हमारे पास जराए हैं जिनके ऊपर इस हुकूमत का मुकम्मल फोकस होगा, हमारी तरजीह होगी, और वो जराए हैं। एक तो पन बिजली, लेकिन उसमें वक्त बहुत लगता है, तो इस वक्त जो हाईएस्ट और सबसे अवलीन तरजीह है वो سورج کے ذریعے پیدا ہونے والی بجلی ہے, سولر پاور ہے, اس میں بہت بڑا اس کو لگانے کے لیے بھی بہت زیادہ وقت نہیں چاہیے. تو سولر پاور کے اوپر ہمارا فوکس ہوگا, اور اس کے بعد ساتھ ہی ہوا کے ذریعے جو بجلی پیدا ہوتی ہے, ونڈ پاور, اور اس کے ساتھ جو ہمارا ایک اللہ تعالیٰ کی دین ہے کہ تھر کول میں اور پاکستان کے مختلف علاقوں میں